My name is Clayton, 32 years old, and I've spent my entire life trying to earn my father's approval. The manufacturing business he built from nothing was his pride and joy. A legacy I desperately wanted, but was repeatedly told I'd never be worthy of inheriting. So when he announced at Thanksgiving dinner that he was selling the company and I would get nothing, I wasn't surprised. What nobody expected was my response when he proudly named the buyer. Before I tell you how I pulled off the biggest business move of my life, let me know where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to prove your worth to someone who underestimated you. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, in what started as a middle-class family, but gradually transformed into a wealthy one through my father's relentless work ethic. Harold Thompson wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He came from humble beginnings, the son of a factory worker who taught him the value of hard work and determination. When he was 24, he started a small precision manufacturing shop in our garage with just one machine and a dream. By the time I was born, Thompson Manufacturing had already grown into a respectable small business with 15 employees. By my 10th birthday, we had over 100 workers and had moved to an impressive facility on the outskirts of Portland. My childhood home transformed from a modest 3-bedroom house to a sprawling 5-bedroom residence in the most prestigious neighborhood in the city. My mother, Elizabeth, was the unsung hero of our family's success story. While Dad was the face of the business, Mom kept everything else running smoothly. She managed the household, raised 3 children, hosted business dinners, and even helped with company bookkeeping in the early years. Despite her essential contributions, she rarely received credit from my father, who viewed her support as simply what was expected. I was the middle child, sandwiched between my older sister Margaret, who was 4 years my senior, and my younger brother Ryan, who was 3 years behind me. Margaret was the academic star valedictorian, full scholarship to Stanford, and Dad's pride. Ryan was the charming one, naturally athletic, socially adept, and somehow able to make Dad laugh even on his worst days. And me? I was the perpetual disappointment. From my earliest memories, I idolized my father. I would wake up early on Saturdays just to follow him around the house while he did his morning routine. I begged to visit the factory and would sit quietly in the corner of his office, watching him work and dreaming of the day I'd sit in that impressive leather chair. The family business wasn't just a company to me, it was my inheritance, my future, my destiny. At least, that's what I believed. The problem was that nothing I did ever seemed good enough for Harold Thompson. When I brought home an A, he would ask why it wasn't an A+. When I made the baseball team but didn't start, he questioned my dedication. When I showed interest in the business, he found ways to highlight my inadequacies rather than nurture my curiosity. "You don't have the mind for this business, Clayton," he told me on my 16th birthday when I asked if I could start working part-time at the factory. "Margaret understands the numbers better than you ever will, and Ryan has the people skills to lead. You're just not cut out for it." Those words cut deeper than any physical wound could have. Yet, instead of deterring me, they ignited a determination to prove him wrong. I started reading business books, studying successful entrepreneurs, and learning everything I could about manufacturing processes. I worked harder in school, especially in math and economics. I was driven not by passion at first, but by the desperate need for my father's approval. By my senior year of high school, I had earned a respectable GPA and was accepted to the University of Washington's business program. My father's response: "Well, it's not Stanford, but I suppose it's better than community college." During college breaks, I would return home and work at the family business. I started on the shop floor, learning the operation from the ground up. The factory workers took a liking to me perhaps because, unlike my father, I treated them with genuine respect. I listened to their ideas, learned about their families, and gained valuable insights into the inefficiencies of the company's operations. When I brought these observations to my father during my junior year of college, armed with detailed notes and improvement suggestions, he barely glanced at my work before dismissing me. "Leave the business decisions to people who understand business, Clayton," he said, dropping my carefully prepared folder into his desk drawer, without reading a single page. "Focus on graduating first. Then we'll see if there's a place for you here." That moment crystallized something for me. No matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked or how much I learned, I would always be the disappointment. The underachiever. The son who wasn't good enough. My father had decided my worth long ago, and no amount of evidence would change his mind. After graduating with honors with a business degree focused on entrepreneurship, I made one last attempt to join the family business in a meaningful role. I created a comprehensive business development plan, identifying new market opportunities and modernization strategies that could significantly increase the company's profitability. My father finally agreed to a formal meeting. I arrived early, professionally dressed, and prepared for what I hoped would be the beginning of my future, with Thompson Manufacturing. Instead, it became the moment I decided to chart my own course. "This is all theoretical nonsense," he said, pushing my business plan across the table without reading past the first page. "You've never built anything real in your life, Clayton. The business world would eat you alive. I've got a sales associate position open. You can start there, and maybe work your way up if you show some aptitude." I left his office that day with a clarity I had never experienced before. I wouldn't beg for scraps at my father's table. I wouldn't spend my life trying to earn the approval of someone determined not to give it. I would build something of my own, and I would do it without the Thompson name opening doors for me. That night, I packed my bags, told my mother I loved her, and drove north to Seattle. I had $5,000 in savings, a business degree, and a determination forged in the fire of my father's disapproval. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start. Seattle welcomed me with relentless rain and a competitive job market that seemed impenetrable without connections. I rented a tiny studio apartment in a less-than-ideal neighborhood and began the humbling process of building a life from scratch. My first job was as an administrative assistant at a venture capital firm. The position was far below my qualifications, but I viewed it as an opportunity to observe how investment decisions were made from the inside. I arrived early, stayed late, and absorbed everything I could about deal evaluation and company valuation. During lunch breaks, I'd eavesdrop on partner meetings and study the deal memos that crossed my desk. After hours, I developed my own business ideas. My first attempt was a subscription service for manufacturing supplies that failed spectacularly after 3 months. My second venture, a consulting firm for small manufacturers, never secured a single client. With each failure, I could almost hear my father's voice. "I told you so." 6 months into my Seattle life, nearly broke and questioning my decisions, I met Jason Blackwell at an entrepreneurs networking event I had scraped together the last of my money to attend. Jason was a successful angel investor in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and the kind of quiet confidence I associated with genuine success. Unlike the flashier investors I'd encountered, Jason measured his words carefully and asked insightful questions. After listening to my background and ideas, he said something that changed the trajectory of my life. "You know, Clayton, your father's wrong about you. You don't lack ability. You lack opportunity and mentorship. I see something in you that reminds me of myself at your age." Within a week, Jason had hired me as an analyst at his investment firm and began teaching me the art of finding diamond in the rough companies. His approach was different from the venture capital model I'd observed. Rather than chasing unicorns, he looked for solid businesses with good fundamentals that were undervalued or struggling due to fixable problems. "Most investors want to find the next Facebook," Jason told me. "I'd rather find a good company making essential products that needs better management or strategic direction. Less glamorous, but more reliable returns." After a year under Jason's mentorship, I made my first independent investment recommendation, a small specialized tooling company facing bankruptcy after its founder's death. Jason approved a modest investment, and I took an active role in restructuring the business. 6 months later, the company had returned to profitability. After 18 months, we sold it for triple our investment. That success gave me the confidence and capital to strike out on my own. With Jason's blessing and a small investment from him, I established Everest Holdings when I was 26 years old. The name embodied my ambition to reach the highest peaks of business success, one careful step at a time. Everest Holdings began as a one-man operation, working out of a shared office space. My approach was methodical. Find struggling but fundamentally sound manufacturing businesses, acquire them at reasonable valuations, implement operational improvements, and either hold for cash flow or sell for profit. I focused particularly on family-owned businesses facing succession challenges, a niche I understood intimately from personal experience. My third acquisition became the cornerstone of my growing empire. North Pacific Tool & Die was a second-generation family business with excellent products and a loyal customer base, but outdated production methods and mounting debt. The owner was approaching 70, with no clear succession plan as his children had pursued careers outside the industry. I acquired the company for $2 million, mostly with borrowed capital backed by the company's assets. Within a year, I had modernized the production line, implemented digital inventory management, and expanded the customer base by 30%. The company's value doubled, and more importantly, it generated the cash flow that fueled my subsequent acquisitions. Over the next 5 years, I refined my business model. Unlike traditional private equity firms that slashed workforces and extracted maximum short-term value, Everest Holdings focused on sustainable growth. We retained experienced employees, invested in modernization, and created cultures of innovation and efficiency. This approach earned me the trust of business owners who cared about their legacies and employees. As my confidence grew, so did the complexity of my corporate structure. I established subsidiary holding companies for different industry segments and geographic regions. This compartmentalized approach served two purposes. It reduced risk exposure and, perhaps more importantly for me psychologically, it obscured the full extent of my success from casual observation. If anyone from my family or their business circles happened to hear of one of my companies, they wouldn't necessarily connect it to the others or to me personally. By the time I turned 30, Everest Holdings had acquired 12 manufacturing companies across the Pacific Northwest, with combined annual revenue exceeding $70 million. My personal net worth had grown to over $20 million, though you wouldn't know it from my modest lifestyle. I maintained a comfortable but unassuming apartment in Seattle's Ballard neighborhood, drove a practical 3-year-old Audi, and invested most of my profits back into the business. Throughout this period of growth, I maintained minimal contact with my family. I would visit for major holidays and occasional family events, but I revealed little about my professional life. When asked, I would vaguely mention working in business consulting or doing some investments. My father never pressed for details, seemingly content with his assumption that I was merely getting by in a mediocre career. During these visits, the family dynamic remained unchanged. Margaret, now a successful attorney with a perfect family, received effusive praise. Ryan, who had joined the family business after college and was being groomed as the heir apparent, was the focus of business discussions. I remained the afterthought, the disappointment, the son who couldn't cut it. The irony was painful. While my father dismissed me at the Thanksgiving table, companies I controlled were increasingly competing with Thompson Manufacturing in certain market segments. While he assumed I was barely making ends meet, I was building a business empire that would soon eclipse his own. The temptation to reveal my success was sometimes overwhelming, but pride kept me silent. I didn't want his approval if it came only from knowing my net worth. Perhaps it was childish, but I wanted him to recognize my worth without external validation. I wanted him to see me, really see me for once in his life. And so I played the role of underachieving middle child, while quietly building the means to control my own destiny. What I didn't realize then was how destiny was preparing me for a moment that would change everything. A moment that would arrive, fittingly enough, at our family Thanksgiving table. It was mid-October when I first heard rumors that Thompson Manufacturing might be for sale. I was having dinner with a supplier in Portland who casually mentioned that old man Thompson is finally looking to cash out. My external reaction was measured, but internally, my mind was racing. Back in Seattle, I tasked our research team with discreet inquiries into Thompson Manufacturing's current status. The picture that emerged was fascinating. The company remained profitable, but had stagnated over the past 5 years. While competitors had embraced automation and digital transformation, my father had stubbornly maintained outdated processes out of a misplaced sense of tradition. More concerning were the signs of operational mismanagement. Key long-term employees had been leaving at an alarming rate. Customer complaints about delivery delays had increased. The company's cash reserves had dwindled significantly, suggesting potential cash flow problems despite reported profitability. I spent several sleepless nights contemplating my next move. Acquiring the family business would be the ultimate vindication proof that I had succeeded despite my father's lack of faith. But did I want to build my success on such a personal and potentially painful foundation? Was this business decision being driven by strategic logic or emotional wounds? After a week of deliberation, I met with Jason, who was now my closest advisor, though no longer an active investor in my companies. "This isn't just any acquisition for you, Clayton," he said after listening to my analysis of the opportunity. "This is personal, in ways that could cloud your judgment. Are you sure you want to go down this road?" "I've built Everest by identifying undervalued companies with strong fundamentals that are suffering from poor management or outdated practices," I replied. "By that criteria alone, Thompson Manufacturing is a perfect acquisition target. The personal connection is complicated, but it doesn't change the business case." Jason studied me for a long moment before nodding. "Okay, but promise me you'll maintain absolute professional distance throughout this process. No emotional decisions. And use a blind acquisition structure to avoid complications until you're ready for the family to know." I agreed, and we began preparations for what would be the most complex acquisition of my career. I established a new holding company, Summit Acquisitions, specifically for this purpose, with ownership traces that would be difficult to connect directly to me. Our legal team created a labyrinthine structure of LLCs and corporate entities to mask the true purchaser. Over the next 2 weeks, I conducted thorough due diligence through third-party consultants who had no knowledge of my personal connection to the target company. The findings confirmed my suspicions while revealing new concerns. Thompson Manufacturing had significant untapped potential loyal customers, excellent product quality, and valuable intellectual property. But it also had outdated infrastructure, inefficient processes, and worrying signs of financial mismanagement. Most troubling were the indications that both Margaret and Ryan had been extracting value from the company for personal gain. Margaret, despite her minimal involvement in operations, was receiving substantial consulting fees that appeared to have no corresponding deliverables. Ryan had pushed through several equipment purchases from vendors that offered kickbacks disguised as finder's fees. These discoveries transformed my perspective on the acquisition. This wasn't just about proving myself anymore. It was about saving a fundamentally good company from being hollowed out by my own siblings. As Thanksgiving approached, negotiations between Summit Acquisitions and Thompson Manufacturing intensified. My father, not knowing he was effectively negotiating with me, drove a hard bargain, but ultimately accepted an offer of $55 million, a fair valuation given the company's current state and potential. The timing worked out perfectly, or perhaps ominously. The preliminary agreement was signed just 2 days before Thanksgiving, with the closing set for mid-December pending final due diligence. I suspected my father was planning to announce the sale at our Thanksgiving gathering, though I had no idea how he would frame it or what he planned to do with the proceeds. The annual Thompson Thanksgiving had been a tradition since before I was born. Regardless of what was happening in our lives or how far-flung family members had scattered, everyone returned to the family home in Portland for the elaborate celebration. This year would be my first Thanksgiving as the secret buyer of the family business, and the anticipation was almost unbearable. I arrived in Portland on Wednesday evening, checking into a downtown hotel rather than staying at the family home as I usually would. I needed space to process whatever was about to unfold. That night, I rehearsed various scenarios in my mind, planning responses to different possible announcements or reactions. Despite this preparation, nothing could have prepared me for what actually transpired. Thursday morning, I drove to my parents' house with a strange sense of calm. The sprawling colonial-style home looked exactly as it always had, meticulously maintained, imposingly perfect, just like the image my father cultivated for our family. I parked my rental car between Margaret's Mercedes SUV and Ryan's Porsche sports car, a visual representation of our respective places in the family hierarchy, or so they thought. My mother greeted me at the door with her usual warm hug. At 61, Elizabeth Thompson remained elegant and graceful, though I noticed more gray in her auburn hair and new lines of worry around her eyes. "Clayton, darling," she said, holding me at arm's length to look me over. "You look well. Success agrees with you." There was something knowing in her expression that gave me pause. Did she suspect more about my business achievements than I'd revealed? Before I could respond, my father's booming voice carried from the living room. "Is that Clayton finally arriving? Always the last one, aren't you, son?" Some things never changed. I took a deep breath and stepped into the living room where my father sat in his favorite leather armchair like a king on his throne. At 65, Harold Thompson remained an imposing figure, 6'2", with a full head of silver hair and the confident bearing of someone used to being obeyed without question. Ryan lounged on the sofa, scrolling through his phone with affected disinterest. Margaret sat primly in the window seat, her husband James beside her, both looking uncommonly pleased with themselves. The atmosphere felt charged with unspoken anticipation, confirming my suspicion that an announcement was coming. Small talk dominated the next few hours as my mother finished preparing the elaborate Thanksgiving meal. I noticed my father checking his watch frequently, as though waiting for a specific moment. Margaret and Ryan exchanged knowing glances whenever they thought no one was looking. Only my mother seemed genuinely interested in my life in Seattle, asking thoughtful questions about my work and apartment while we helped in the kitchen. "You seem different this year," she said quietly while we were alone preparing the cranberry sauce. "More confident, like you've finally found your place." I smiled. "Maybe I have, Mom. Maybe I have." By the time we gathered around the dining table at 4 o'clock, the tension was palpable. The table was set with my mother's best china and crystal, the turkey perfectly golden, and every traditional side dish arranged with precision. My father sat at the head of the table, my mother at the foot, with Margaret, James, and Ryan on one side, and me alone on the other, the physical embodiment of the family's emotional divisions. As my mother began serving the turkey, my father cleared his throat and raised his wine glass. "Before we eat, I have an important announcement to make, one that will change all our lives." The moment I had been anticipating and dreading had arrived. I took a sip of water and prepared myself for whatever was coming next. "As some of you already know," my father began, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he typically reserved for board meetings, "I've made the decision to sell Thompson Manufacturing." Margaret and Ryan nodded, their expressions confirming they'd been privy to this information before the announcement. My mother's face remained carefully neutral, though I detected a slight tightening around her eyes. "After 40 years of building this company from nothing, I've accepted an offer that recognizes the true value of what I've created," he continued, chest puffing with pride. "The deal will close before Christmas, and we'll be starting the new year with a fresh chapter for our family." He paused, sweeping his gaze around the table before landing on me. Something in his expression, a gleam of satisfaction perhaps, sent a chill down my spine. "The proceeds will be distributed according to contribution and merit," he said, his voice hardening slightly. Margaret will receive 20% for her legal counsel over the years. Ryan, as my right hand in the business, will receive 30%. He took another sip of wine, clearly savoring the moment, before delivering the blow he had planned. Elizabeth will receive 25% for her years of support. He turned to face me directly. And Clayton. Well, Clayton will receive nothing. He abandoned the family business to pursue his own interests. He's made his choice, and now he'll live with the consequences. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Despite having anticipated something like this, the public declaration of my worthlessness still stung. For a brief moment, I was transported back to every childhood dinner where my achievements were dismissed, every family gathering where I was the afterthought. Margaret's lips curved into a barely suppressed smile. Ryan openly smirked, raising his glass in a mock toast. "Tough break, bro," he said with false sympathy. "Maybe you can apply for a job at the new company." My mother placed her napkin on the table, her knuckles white with tension. "Harold, surely, my decision is final," my father interrupted. "Those who contribute receive rewards. Those who don't." He gestured dismissively in my direction. I took a slow, deliberate breath. This was the moment I had unknowingly been preparing for my entire adult life. I could feel the weight of years of dismissal, underestimation, and emotional neglect pressing down on me. But instead of crushing me, it strengthened my resolve. "That seems fair," I said quietly, surprising everyone at the table with my calm acceptance. After all, business decisions should be based on merit and contribution. My father blinked, clearly thrown by my lack of protest. He had expected anger, perhaps pleading, but not this composed agreement. "I am curious, though," I continued, keeping my tone conversational. "Who's the buyer? Anyone we know?" My father's expression shifted to one of pride again. "A company called Everest Holdings, through their acquisition subsidiary Summit. They're paying $55 million, a testament to the empire I've built." The moment stretched into eternity. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, hear the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, sense the tension radiating from every person at the table. For years I had imagined revealing my success to my father, forcing him to acknowledge my worth. Now that the moment had arrived, I found myself strangely calm. "That's interesting, Dad," I said, placing my napkin carefully on the table. "Because I am Everest Holdings." The silence that followed was absolute. My father's face went through a remarkable transformation: confusion, disbelief, shock, and finally, dawning comprehension. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I said, "I am Everest Holdings. I founded it 7 years ago. Summit Acquisitions is my subsidiary, created specifically for this purchase. I'm the one buying Thompson Manufacturing for $55 million. I kept my voice level, professional. Ryan's wine glass slipped from his fingers, spilling red across the white tablecloth like blood. Margaret's husband James choked on his water. My mother covered her mouth with her hand, though not before I caught the hint of a surprised smile. "That's impossible," Ryan sputtered. "You're nobody. You've never built anything. You're just a disappointment," I finished for him. "A failure, the son who couldn't cut it. That's what you all believed, because that's what I allowed you to believe." I turned back to my father, whose face had drained of all color. "While you were dismissing me, I was building a company that now controls 12 manufacturing businesses across the Pacific Northwest, with annual revenue exceeding $70 million. While you were grooming Ryan as your heir, I was developing a business model that has consistently outperformed industry averages. And while you were negotiating to sell your company, you had no idea you were actually negotiating with your supposedly worthless middle child." "You're lying," my father said, but his voice lacked conviction. "This is some kind of trick." I reached into my jacket pocket and removed a business card, simple, elegant, with only Clayton Thompson, founder and CEO, Everest Holdings, embossed on heavy stock. I placed it on the table and slid it toward him. Your attorneys have been dealing with mine for weeks. You can call them right now to confirm if you'd like. The $55 million you're so proud of securing will be coming from me. Margaret recovered first, her legal mind already calculating angles. If this is true, it's a clear conflict of interest. You had inside information about our company. We could challenge this sale on those grounds. You could try, I agreed. But my legal team has ensured everything is above board. I used no insider information. In fact, I hired third-party consultants to conduct all due diligence precisely to avoid such accusations. And given what those consultants uncovered about certain financial irregularities involving consulting fees with no deliverables and equipment vendor kickbacks, I don't think you want to invite that kind of scrutiny. Margaret and Ryan both flinched, confirming my suspicions about their activities. My mother's eyes widened slightly, suggesting she hadn't known about these issues. Why? My father finally asked, his voice smaller than I had ever heard it. Why would you do this? Because Thompson Manufacturing is a good company with great potential that's being mismanaged and taken advantage of, I answered honestly. From a purely business perspective, it's an excellent acquisition opportunity. The fact that it happens to be the family business is complicated, but it doesn't change the business case. I stood up from the table, no longer hungry for turkey, but starving for the fresh air of freedom from family expectations. I'll be stepping out to give everyone some time to process this information. The acquisition will proceed as planned, unless you choose to back out. Dad, but remember, you've already signed the preliminary agreement, and you won't find another buyer willing to pay $55 million for a company in Thompson's current condition. As I walked toward the door, my mother called after me, Clayton, wait. I turned back. Every eye at the table was still fixed on me, expressions ranging from shock to anger, to, in my mother's case, something that looked surprisingly like pride. Will you be back for dessert? She asked softly. Despite everything, I smiled. Yes, Mom. I'll be back for dessert. I returned to find the dining room abandoned, but heard raised voices from my father's study. Following the sound, I found my family in the midst of heated argument. My father stood behind his desk, face flushed with anger. Margaret and Ryan faced him, both gesticulating wildly. My mother sat quietly in the corner armchair, watching the scene with tired resignation. The argument paused abruptly when I entered. All eyes turned to me, and the atmosphere shifted from anger to something more complex, a volatile mixture of resentment, disbelief, and grudging reassessment. You've got some nerve showing your face again, Ryan spat. After the stunt you just pulled. I believe Mom invited me back for dessert, I replied calmly. But it seems we have unfinished business to discuss first. My father slammed his hand on the desk. Unfinished business? Is that what you call this? This underhanded betrayal? You secretly plotted to take over my company, my life's work. I made a business decision to acquire an underperforming asset with strong fundamentals and significant growth potential. I corrected him, deliberately using the dispassionate language of business. The same decision I would have made if Thompson Manufacturing belonged to any other seller. Don't give me that corporate bullshit, my father growled. This wasn't business. This was personal. You did this to spite me to prove some point. Did I? I asked, moving further into the room. Or did you force this situation by underestimating me my entire life? By deciding I was worthless, before giving me a chance to prove otherwise? By announcing to our family that I deserve nothing from the legacy you built supposedly for all of us? Margaret stepped forward, arms crossed defensively. You abandoned the family business, Clayton. You walked away. Ryan and I stayed and put in the work. Did you? I countered. Because my due diligence team found some interesting patterns in the company finances. Like how you've received over $800,000 in consulting fees over the past 5 years, with no documented deliverables. Or how Ryan's equipment modernization initiative mysteriously always selects vendors who pay him personal finder's fees. Ryan's face paled. That's a lie. We have the documentation, I said quietly. All of it. Every transaction, every suspicious payment, every decision that benefited you personally at the company's expense. My father looked between his two favored children, confusion, and the first hints of doubt crossing his face. What is he talking about? For the first time in my memory, neither Margaret nor Ryan had a quick response. Their silence spoke volumes. They've been bleeding the company dry, Dad, I explained. Not enough to sink it immediately, but enough to erode its value and sustainability. The company has lost 23 key employees in the past 3 years. People who helped build it from the beginning. Customer complaints have increased 40%. Cash reserves are down 60%, despite reported profits. My father turned to Ryan, his expression demanding explanation. Ryan's bravado crumbled under that scrutiny. The business needed modernization, and sometimes you have to grease the wheels to get things done quickly, he stammered. It wasn't like I was stealing. I was facilitating necessary improvements. By accepting kickbacks? My father asked incredulously. Before Ryan could respond, my mother spoke up from her corner. Harold, are you really surprised? You've taught our children that the only measure of worth is financial success. Margaret and Ryan simply followed your example, maximizing personal gain however they could. The only difference is that Clayton chose to build something rather than extract value from what was already built. The room fell silent at her unexpected intervention. In all our family conflicts, my mother had typically remained neutral. The peacemaker, who smoothed ruffled feathers without taking sides. This direct challenge to my father's values was unprecedented. That's not fair, Elizabeth, my father protested, but with less conviction than usual. Isn't it? She pressed. For years I've watched you praise Margaret and Ryan while dismissing Clayton, regardless of their actual accomplishments or character. I've watched you define success solely in terms of loyalty to your vision, rather than independent achievement. And now you're shocked that Margaret and Ryan exploited that loyalty for personal gain while Clayton built something impressive on his own? My father seemed genuinely taken aback by this new perspective from his usually supportive wife. He turned to me, reassessing. So what happens now? He asked, his tone less hostile than before. You own the company. Do you plan to dismantle it? Fire everyone? Is this your revenge? The question revealed so much about how my father thought about business, about me, about human motivation. He couldn't conceive that I might have plans beyond revenge or destruction. No, Dad. I plan to save it, I said quietly. Thompson Manufacturing has good bones, excellent products, and a loyal customer base despite recent problems. What it needs is modernization, better management practices, and integrity at the top. I intend to provide those things and help the company reach its full potential. Why should we believe you? Ryan challenged, though his usual swagger had diminished considerably. You've been lying to us for years about your business. I never lied, I corrected. I simply didn't volunteer information to people who never showed interest in my achievements. There's a difference. I turned back to my father. The acquisition will proceed as planned, with 2 potential paths forward. Option 1. You can accept the $55 million offer, divide it however you see fit, and walk away. Option 2. You can remain involved as Chairman Emeritus with a reduced ownership stake and help ensure a smooth transition. Either way, the company will be under my control, and I will implement the changes necessary for its survival and growth. My father's expression darkened again. You really think you can run my company better than I can? After just a few years playing businessman with whatever small ventures you've managed to cobble together? The dismissal was so familiar, so predictably belittling, that I almost laughed. Even now, facing irrefutable evidence of my success, he couldn't acknowledge my capabilities. Dad, Everest Holdings generates more annual revenue than Thompson Manufacturing. We employ more people, serve more customers, and have consistently higher profit margins. So yes, I believe I can run the company more effectively than it's currently being run. I turned to include Margaret and Ryan in my gaze. And unlike some, I understand that long-term success comes from building value, not extracting it. Margaret's legal mind was already calculating her next move. And what about our positions in the company? Are you planning to fire your own siblings? That depends on you, I answered honestly. If you're willing to contribute genuinely to the company's success, without inflated consulting fees or kickback schemes, there could be appropriate roles for you. If not, then yes, our professional relationship will end with this acquisition. Ryan looked panicked now. But the money from the sale, we'll still get our shares, right? Dad promised. I looked at my father. That's up to Dad. The $55 million will go to him as the primary shareholder. How he distributes it is his decision. Though given what we now know about your and Margaret's activities, he might want to reconsider the merit-based allocation he announced earlier. The room fell into tense silence again. Years of family dynamics, unspoken resentments, and complicated emotions hung in the air between us. We had moved past the initial shock, but the full implications of this upheaval would take time to process. My mother stood up from her chair. I think we could all use that dessert now. I made pumpkin and pecan pies. Clayton, would you help me in the kitchen? The simple domestic request cut through the tension. Without waiting for agreement from the others, I followed my mother out of the study, leaving my father and siblings to digest the new reality I had presented them with. In the kitchen, my mother silently handed me dessert plates, while she cut perfect slices of pie. For several minutes, we worked in companionable silence, falling into the rhythm of cooperation we had established during my childhood years, helping her prepare family meals. I always knew you would do something remarkable, she said finally, placing a scoop of whipped cream alongside a slice of pumpkin pie. But I never imagined this. Are you disappointed in me? I asked, suddenly feeling like a child seeking parental approval despite everything that had transpired. She looked up sharply. Disappointed? Clayton, I'm immensely proud of you. Not because you've built a successful business, or because you've outmaneuvered your father, though both are impressive. I'm proud because you did it with integrity, on your own terms, without becoming bitter or vindictive despite how you were treated. She set down the pie server and took my hands in hers. Your father never saw you clearly. That's his loss, not yours. But I've always seen you, Clayton. I've always known your worth wasn't dependent on his recognition of it. Her words washed over me like a healing balm. Throughout my quest to prove myself, I had focused so intently on earning my father's approval that I had overlooked the unwavering support my mother had always provided. Why did you stay with him? I asked the question I'd wondered for years but never voiced. She smiled sadly. Marriage is complicated, Clayton. Your father isn't a bad man, just a limited one in some ways. He loves in the only way he knows how. And despite his flaws, we built a life together that had value and meaning. We carried the desserts into the dining room, where an uneasy truce seemed to have formed. My father sat at the head of the table again, looking older and more tired than he had just hours before. Margaret and Ryan had composed themselves, but remained watchful and wary. We ate dessert in uncomfortable silence until my father finally spoke. I'd like to meet with you tomorrow at the company headquarters, he said, addressing me directly, to discuss transition details. I'll be there, I agreed. 9 o'clock? He nodded curtly. It wasn't acceptance or acknowledgement of my achievements, but it was a start, a willingness to engage on a professional level if not yet a personal one. I returned to my hotel that night with mixed emotions. The confrontation had unfolded differently than I had imagined during all those years of building my business empire in secret. There was no satisfaction in seeing my father humbled, no joy in exposing my siblings' betrayals. Instead, I felt a strange combination of relief, melancholy, and cautious hope-relief that the truth was finally out. Melancholy for the family relationships that might never fully heal, and hope that perhaps something healthier could eventually emerge from the rubble of our family myths. Around 11 that night, there was a soft knock at my hotel room door. I opened it to find my mother standing there, looking determined. "May I come in?" she asked. "There are things you should know." Over the next 2 hours, my mother revealed family history I had never known. She told me about my father's own childhood, under a harshly critical father who had abandoned the family when Harold was 12. She explained how my father's drive for success had been fueled by a desperate need to prove his worth to a man who would never see it, a pattern he had unknowingly repeated with me. "He sees too much of himself in you," she said gently. "Your independence frightens him because he never had the courage to break free of his father's shadow the way you have. He built his business to earn approval from a ghost, while you built yours, despite the disapproval of the living." These insights didn't excuse my father's behavior but helped me understand it from a new perspective. The revelation that I had been fighting my father's battles as much as my own gave me a framework for approaching our meeting the next day, with greater empathy and clearer purpose. The next morning, I arrived at Thompson Manufacturing headquarters precisely at 9. The receptionist, a woman who had known me since I was a child bringing my father lunch during summer breaks, did a double take when I gave my name. "Mr. Clayton, it's been years," she said warmly. "Your father is expecting you in the conference room." Walking through the factory floor brought a flood of memories. Despite the outdated equipment and inefficient layout I noted with my business eye, the familiar sights, sounds, and smells of the manufacturing process triggered a surprising sense of homecoming. This had been my first classroom in business. My first love before my father's dismissal had forced me to look elsewhere. My father sat alone at the head of the conference table, a stack of folders neatly arranged before him. He looked as though he hadn't slept much, but his posture remained rigid with pride. "Clayton," he acknowledged as I took a seat to his right, the position traditionally reserved for his most trusted advisor, usually occupied by Ryan at board meetings. "Dad," I replied, keeping my tone neutral but not cold. We spent the first hour reviewing the acquisition details professionally. My father was still a shrewd businessman, asking incisive questions about my plans for the company, challenging some of my modernization proposals, and occasionally offering grudging approval for my more innovative strategies. As we concluded the business discussion, he closed his folder and looked at me directly for what felt like the first time in my adult life. "Your mother told me you've offered me the position of chairman emeritus," he said carefully. "What exactly would that entail?" "You would remain the public face of Thompson Manufacturing," I explained. "You'd maintain relationships with key long-term clients who value personal connections. You'd have an advisory role on major strategic decisions, though final authority would rest with me. And you'd help ensure a smooth transition that preserves the best aspects of the company's legacy while enabling necessary changes." He considered this for a long moment. "And my ownership stake?" 10%, I said. "Non-controlling, but with preferential dividends." Another long silence followed as he processed the offer. Then, surprising me completely, he asked, "What about your mother? And your siblings?" The question revealed concern I hadn't expected. Despite everything, he was still thinking about the family's welfare. "Mom's future is secure regardless of your decision," I assured him. "As for Margaret and Ryan, that depends on their choices moving forward. They have talents that could benefit the company if they're willing to operate with integrity and accountability. If not, they'll receive fair severance packages and need to find their own paths." My father nodded slowly. "And if I refuse your offer? If I simply take the money and walk away? Then you'll be a wealthy man with no purpose," I said quietly. Is that really what you want, Dad? To end your career being bought out by the son you thought would amount to nothing? His expression tightened, but not with anger, with recognition. For perhaps the first time, he was seeing me clearly. No, he said finally. That's not what I want. We reached an agreement by noon. My father would accept the chairman emeritus position. The acquisition would proceed with minor adjustments to the transition timeline. We would present a united front to employees, customers, and the public, emphasizing continuity and growth rather than change of control. The subsequent weeks were challenging, but productive. Margaret opted to take her share of the proceeds and return to her legal practice, recognizing that her position in the new company structure would involve genuine work rather than sinecures. Ryan, after initial resistance, agreed to a 6-month probationary period as sales director under strict oversight and performance metrics. The most remarkable transformation, however, was in my relationship with my father. With the power dynamics fundamentally altered, he began to see me as a peer rather than a disappointment. During transition meetings, he occasionally looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. Not quite approval, not quite respect, but something close to recognition. 3 months into the transition, we stayed late reviewing customer retention data. As we gathered our papers to leave, he paused. That supplier diversification strategy you implemented last month, he said hesitantly. It was smart. I should have done that years ago. The words were simple. But coming from Harold Thompson, they were revolutionary. An acknowledgement that I might actually know something he didn't. It wasn't effusive praise or a dramatic apology for years of dismissal, but it was a start. Thanks, Dad, I said simply. I learned from watching you build this place. I just added some new perspectives. He nodded, and for a brief moment, I glimpsed a future where we might actually build something together, not as father and disappointing son, but as two businessmen with complementary strengths and shared goals. That night, driving back to my temporary apartment in Portland, I realized that success hadn't brought me what I thought it would. For years, I had driven myself to achieve specifically to prove my father wrong, to force him to acknowledge my worth. But now that I had achieved that goal, it felt hollow. The validation I had sought for so long mattered less than I had imagined. What mattered more was the integrity with which I had built my business, the employees whose livelihoods depended on my decisions, and the possibility of transforming my relationship with my family into something healthier. I hadn't acquired Thompson Manufacturing to destroy my father's legacy, but to preserve and enhance it, and perhaps, in the process, to heal the wounds that had driven me for so long. 6 months after that fateful Thanksgiving dinner, Thompson Manufacturing, now a division of Everest Holdings, was undergoing a remarkable transformation. We had modernized the production facilities, implemented digital inventory management, and expanded into new markets that complemented our existing strengths. Employee morale had improved dramatically as we introduced profit sharing, professional development programs, and a culture of innovation and open communication. My father, in his role as chairman emeritus, had surprised everyone, especially me, with his adaptation to the new reality. After the initial shock and adjustment period, he seemed almost relieved to be freed from the burdens of day-to-day management. He focused on mentoring key employees, maintaining relationships with long-term clients, and occasionally offering valuable insights based on his decades of experience. Most surprisingly, he had begun to acknowledge my business acumen without the defensive comparison or dismissal that had characterized our relationship throughout my life. It wasn't effusive praise or dramatic declarations of pride. Harold Thompson would never be that man. But it was genuine recognition, and that meant more than any emotional display could have. Ryan had struggled initially with his reduced status and strict accountability measures. There were several tense conversations during his probationary period, when old patterns threatened to reemerge. But gradually, under structured mentorship and clear expectations, he began to develop legitimate skills and contribute positively to the company. He would never be the natural business leader my father had imagined, but he was finding his own authentic place in the organization. Margaret had chosen to remain at arm's length professionally, focusing on her legal career, but our personal relationship had begun to thaw. Without the constant competition for our father's approval poisoning our interactions, we discovered we actually enjoyed each other's company during family gatherings. She had even apologized awkwardly and indirectly, but sincerely for her role in the family dynamics that had marginalized me for so long. My mother flourished in this new family configuration. Freed from her role as peacekeeper and mediator, she pursued interests she had set aside during the years of family tension. She started a small foundation supporting educational opportunities for children from disadvantaged backgrounds, served on community boards, and rekindled friendships that had taken a back seat to family drama. Seeing her come alive in these new roles was perhaps the most satisfying outcome of all the changes. As for me, the acquisition of Thompson Manufacturing had forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about my own motivations. For years, I had channeled the pain of rejection and dismissal into building something impressive, telling myself it was about proving my worth. But worth isn't something that needs external validation. It exists independently of others' recognition. True success, I was learning, couldn't be measured by net worth or corporate acquisitions. It was about creating value rather than extracting it, about building rather than tearing down, about finding peace with your past while creating a better future. These realizations transformed how I approached both business and personal relationships, softening the driven edge that had fueled my rise, while preserving the determination and vision that made it possible. The following Thanksgiving could not have been more different from the one that had changed everything. We gathered at my parents' home again, but the atmosphere was relaxed rather than tense. My father carved the turkey without grand announcements or power plays. My mother smiled more freely than I could remember seeing in years. Ryan brought a new girlfriend, who seemed to appreciate him for who he was, rather than his position or prospects. Margaret and James actually asked thoughtful questions about my life and business, instead of making veiled competitive comparisons. After dinner, my father invited me to join him in his study, a space that had once been the exclusive domain of serious family business discussions from which I was typically excluded. He poured 2 glasses of the scotch he saved for special occasions, and handed one to me. "I've been thinking about legacy lately," he said, looking more contemplative than I could ever remember seeing him. "About what we leave behind that truly matters." I nodded, giving him space to continue. "I spent my life building a company, believing that was my legacy. But I realize now the company was just a structure important, but ultimately replaceable." He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "The true legacy is in the values we pass on, the relationships we build, the people we influence." He looked up at me, his expression unusually vulnerable. "I failed in that department, Clayton. I was so focused on building something impressive that I couldn't see the damage I was doing to what mattered most." The admission, not quite an apology, but something equally meaningful, hung between us. I could have responded with recrimination, or demanded more explicit acknowledgement of the harm done. But what would that accomplish now? "We all have blind spots, Dad," I said instead. "You taught me determination, excellence, and the satisfaction of building something valuable. Those lessons helped make me who I am, even if they came wrapped in packaging that was sometimes hard to open." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "You've become a better man than I ever managed to be, son. And a better businessman too, though that's harder for me to admit." "I had a good foundation to build on," I replied, offering the olive branch he seemed ready to accept. "And it's never too late to build something new." We clinked glasses in silent agreement. The road ahead would still have its challenges. Decades of family patterns don't disappear overnight, but we had found a path forward, based on mutual respect, rather than the toxic pursuit of approval or validation. Later that evening, as the family gathered in the living room for coffee and dessert, I looked around at these familiar faces now relating to each other in new, healthier ways. The journey that had brought us here had been painful and complicated, but ultimately healing. Success isn't measured by the size of your bank account or the companies you control. It's measured by your integrity, your relationships, and your impact on others' lives. True validation doesn't come from proving critics wrong. It comes from living according to your own values and building something meaningful, regardless of others' opinions. I had learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting past hurts, but about refusing to let them control your future. That parents, for all their power to wound us, are just imperfect humans doing their best with the tools they have. That breaking cycles of toxic family dynamics requires someone brave enough to chart a new course, even when that path is lonely and difficult. Most importantly, I learned that the approval we so desperately seek from others can never fill the space inside us that needs to learn self-acceptance and self-validation. External success means little without internal peace. Have you ever had to prove yourself to someone who underestimated you? How did that experience shape who you became? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of transformation and growth. Share this with someone who might need a reminder that their worth isn't determined by others' recognition of it. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, true success isn't about winning in someone else's eyes. It's about building something that matters according to your own values. My world shattered when my father announced at Thanksgiving dinner that he was selling our family business for $55 million, and I would receive nothing. This Reddit family drama took an unexpected turn when my siblings celebrated my exclusion, not realizing I was secretly the buyer. After years of being underestimated, I'd built Everest Holdings into a business empire without my family's knowledge. When my father proudly named the buyer, I revealed the truth. Dad, I am Everest Holdings. The Reddit family drama that followed exposed years of dysfunction, sibling betrayal, and painful truths. This real-life Reddit family drama shows how success isn't about proving critics wrong, but building something meaningful despite others' opinions. 6 months later, our family began healing, as my father finally acknowledged my worth. If you've experienced similar Reddit family drama or struggled for validation, this story demonstrates that true success comes from within, not external approval. This Reddit family drama teaches that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but refusing to let past hurts control your future.